Hello, I'm the Pope. I just had a rude awakening.
Hello? Hello? Is this thing on? You hear me? Hi, my name is Ken.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, I used to be a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church a few years ago, and then I had a rude awakening. I realized that I didn't have to be chained and bound by the doctrines, by the doctrination of a legal religious society, but I was free to worship the Creator of the universe wholeheartedly. And so here I am today. Thank you.
Hello, is this on? Can you hear me? Hi, my name is Philip Bacon.
Hi, Philip.
I used to be a Methodist pastor and a Baptist preacher.
Shame.
In the beginning, I was happy just tending the flock and preaching to them the dogma, the company denominational line. Boring stuff. And if any of them passed away, I'd be sure and pin the angels' wings upon them. And the bigger the contributor they were, the bigger the set of wings they got.
Shame.
And if any of them missed a sun god worship day, you can bet if they weren't there to put that 20, or better yet, the 50 in the plate, they were going to get a visit, or at least a phone call to find out what was the matter. Then I had a rude awakening. My heart was filled for the first time with the Ruach HaKodesh. I was on fire. The Torah was within me, and I wanted my parishioners to experience the same thing that I had. But ironically, it was the man-made traditions that I had perpetuated with them that became an insurmountable obstacle to them that they could not overcome. I had to repent and come out of her. And I now worship and follow the true Messiah, Yeshua. And I am pleased to announce to you here today that I am the first kosher bacon.
Don? I'm Glenn McWilliams.
Hi, Glenn.
And for 20 years, I served the Lord with the shackles of the Lutheran denomination upon my hands, feet, and even upon my lips. And for all those years, I served these people hindered and shackled by the denominational line, towing that company baggage with me and everything that I taught and did. And then one day, out of the blue, somebody hands me a cassette of the video called The Feasts of the Lord. And I had a rude awakening. And I am glad and proud to tell you that I have been religious system free for the last 7 years. Thank you.
Shalom to our fans. I'm Michael Rood.
Hi, Michael.
Do you have a few minutes? Because I've had a rude awakening. I was standing outside of a darkened theater, And the owner of the theater was going to open the doors for a personal showing for me. I knew everything that I was about to do was wrong. It was against everything I was raised with. I was raised in a good home. I was born December 5th, 1952 in Greenville, Michigan. Dr. Olson was the pediatrician that delivered me at the time, and my earliest remembrances was my mother driving us around in a 55 Chevrolet station wagon, picking up other children about my age for daily vacation Bible school, which I didn't know most of these kids getting in the car, but I was the one that was inviting them. And obviously it was my mother that was doing all the work. She delivered us to Calvary Baptist Church, where at the end of the week they presented me with a gift for bringing the most new people to daily vacation Bible school. As the preacher reached behind the pulpit and pulled out a Bible to hand it to me, he gave it to me and I looked at it and I said, "This is my mother's Bible," which I had left there 3 days before. Oh, excuse me, he pulled out another Bible and I walked out with 2 that day. We moved from Greenville to Belding, where we went to Green Corners Baptist Church, and we were there for about 5 services a week. Sunday morning, Sunday school, then the church service, and then young people's in the evening, and then the evening church service. There was usually the softball team practice on Tuesday night, Wednesday night prayer meeting, and then of course the quarterly business meetings, and then other sundry meetings. Everything that I was taught as an Orthodox Baptist growing up. And so we were living out at that time. I went to a 2-room schoolhouse, Cook's Corners School, and then we moved up to another area and I went to a 1-room schoolhouse, Piper School. And then from there, moving to Ionia, Michigan, where we went to Green Corners Baptist Church. And this was a time in which we were fully involved in the church. My father was the Sunday school superintendent for a while at Green Corners Baptist Church in Belding. And so the questions that I came up with, I remember very distinctly asking my mother, what about the Sabbath day? We were learning about the 10 Commandments, and she told us that our ancestors kept the Sabbath on what she referred to as Saturday, but now we do it a little bit differently. And even then, I knew that her answer wasn't sufficient, and she didn't pretend that it was sufficient at the time, that there was something that was haunting me already about the Sabbath day, and knowing that there was something that just wasn't right at 8 years of age. And so it was many years later in Lincoln Avenue Baptist Church that our pastor, he was on the way to Vietnam as a chaplain. And my friends were going to Vietnam. And it was at that time that I saw a Marine that just came back from Vietnam, and it was kind of hard to look at because we knew that he had nearly died. He'd spent months in the hospital, and as we saw him come into the church that day, I knew that my time was next. And we began talking about what life is all about at that time, but not really finding the answers and not being satisfied with what, even spending all those years and all those hours every week in church, there was still something missing. And now I find myself being raised where, it is illegal to dance. You can't smoke. You can't go to movies, and here I'm actually standing outside of a theater ready to go in. The doors open, I went inside, and I was the only one in the entire theater. I sat right in the middle. The projectionist hit the button, and Cecil B. DeMille took the stage. It was the 10 Commandments. I sat in that theater for those hours and watched that movie play before me, and something stirred so deeply, I knew this was real. I knew that what happened at Mount Sinai was the most important thing that had happened on the planet to set the course of the human race, and I had to go there. I had to hear the voice of the Almighty. I was driven at that point. I had to know what life was about. And as the members of our congregation went to war, and as people were coming back in body bags, we were asking, what is this conscious physical experience called life? What is it all about? And I remember from the second story of a building looking out over the lawn of the Hall Fowler Library in Ionia, and I saw for the first time a revelation happen. I saw the words, thy word is truth. Thy word is truth, emblazoned in fire in front of my eyes as I looked across there, and I realized that if the scripture, if it really is truth, if it really is reality, this is what I'm looking for in life. That I may have the answer right in my hands. I may have had it all my whole life, but I didn't know it. All I got were little numbered sound bites. Part of the quiz team, we would memorize entire books of the Bible, but yet it just never lived for me. And I realized that this could be the answer that I was looking for. And so I began telling people. I told my parents about it. I told my grandparents about this revelation. I saw these fiery words, thy word is truth. And my grandparents looked at each other and said, Martha, what is going on with this boy here? But yet it was so real to me. I began reading the scriptures. I read the book of Acts, and I became so enthralled with it, and I could see that what I was reading looked nothing like what I had experienced my whole life. I saw people walking with the power of God in their lives, and I knew that nothing that I had ever seen in the religious world looked anything like this. And I began asking questions, and in our Sunday school classes, the young people's groups, and having people over to the house and asking questions, reading the scriptures. And then I one day took a look around at the congregation. I looked at the people that were 70, 80 years old, who had spent their whole life in that church, and I realized that all I have to do is learn everything these people know. If I will spend the rest of my life gleaning from them, that by the time I'm 70, 80 years old, I will have the same fire, the same zest, the same power of God in my life as I see in their life. So I left and never went back again. I knew there had to be more. I invited some of the guys down at the pool hall and the foosball hall to join me and go over and listen to an evangelist. We walked into that church, and everyone's hair was down below their shoulders as we walked in, with cutoffs and T-shirts on to go hear the evangelist. And this is walking into a Baptist church where everyone had high and tights, little narrow ties, and sitting there all prim and proper. But the message that was brought moved these young men. And they all went forward when the altar call came. And then they were led through the sinner's prayer, and did the repeat after me prayer. And then they said, now boys, you have to go out and get your hair cut. What? Remember Gary Peterson saying, Jesus had long hair. What's the deal here? Realize that somehow there's a disconnect. Something's not adding up here. Well, I decided I was going to do the hardest thing I could think of doing. I was going to join the Marine Corps. I was going to enlist in the infantry, so I'd be certain to go to Vietnam. And I wanted to see if the Word of God really worked. If miracles could still happen. If people still could be healed and raised from the dead. So I decided to leave, join the Marine Corps, go to Parris Island. And so on August 27th of 1972, I found myself on the footprints at Parris Island, platoon 295, and this is my opportunity to prove the Almighty. Every time it was time for the smokers to light up, I would pull out my scriptures and I would begin memorizing. I decided I was going to push myself as hard as I could. We're getting ready to go to war. And even though things were starting to trail down in Vietnam, Marines were still being sent over there, and I was guaranteed to go if there's any action to happen. And so, by the end of it, the drill instructors were betting on who was going to take the range record. The wind was blowing so hard that morning of qualification, I couldn't keep that rifle on the target. And I was kept on being blown off, and then after I got through firing my first round, it just calmed right down. Everyone else had a calm day. And I missed having the range record by 1 point. I went from there and was sent out to San Onofre, California, infantry training. I was a platoon guide for weapons platoon, 81 millimeter mortars. We humped through the hillside of California waiting for orders at the end of this to go to Vietnam, and we sat there for 2 weeks, and Nixon called, said no more Marines are going. So I knew a different adventure was in store. I got orders to Marine Barracks down in Jacksonville, Cecil Field, Florida, where I was running a convoy, a nuclear weapons convoy, after a short amount of time, having received my first meritorious promotion out of boot camp with proficiency in conduct of 4950. If I would have gotten that 1 point, I probably would have gotten 5050. But I received my second meritorious promotion when I was down there in Cecil Field, Florida, and nothing really happened. It's what you want to happen when you are hauling nuclear warheads from one place to another to load them on planes and on ships. And so it was very quiet there. But I was offered the second meritorious promotion at that point, and the first sergeant called me into the office and said that the State Department is asking for more Marine security guards to go to Henderson Hall in Washington, D.C. Said, do you want to go work for the U.S. Embassy? I said, yes, sir. I got on a plane, went to Henderson Hall, and that is where the real competition began. Week after week, I was right at the top of the class. Number one, number two, number one, number two, but there was something going on. In morning formation, a rough old gunny, bald-headed guy came up and every morning would give me a demerit for having my tie tack, my tie clasp in the wrong place. The staff sergeant would always be watching, and he would make sure that it was right. Then he got a ruler out and had the men on each side of me measure it. It was dead center, right down the line. The gunny came up, gave me another demerit. Something was going on, and I was called in before the State Department. It turned out that I had been followed. They were following me because on every Sunday I would take a group of Marines and we would go over to Arlington National Cemetery. We would sit at the grave of Walter Reed. We'd polish our boots and brass and we'd read the Bible all day long. Something was not fitting with what they wanted. I got called in before the State Department, and this gunnery sergeant then made the pronouncement after a very short amount of time that says that we believe that your beliefs are not compatible with the Marine unit on the field. We are releasing you. Would you like to have an honorable discharge as a conscientious objector? I said, I joined to go to war. I'm not a conscientious objector. I said, okay. You're going to 2nd Marine Division. I walked out of that room, and I would like to say what broke loose, but the staff sergeant and a number of people were absolutely irate. I was at the top of the class, and for them to dismiss me, they knew that I was leading people in a right direction. I was motivating them. I kept the team together. But I said, no, we're not going to fight it. Because I had been praying that I would know God's will and that He would direct my path. And I fasted for the next 3 days, and then as I was in the transit hall, I reached up to grab a big red book. This red book was given to me when I was down in Florida. The pastor of the Baptist church where I was attending down there, this is a very strange thing. I went to this Baptist church. The pastor invited me over for the dinner with his family and a number of the deacons and elders. And after the meal, everyone lit up cigarettes and cigars. And I said, excuse me, sir, but up north you go to hell for doing that. I said, this is the same denomination. And so there's obviously some kind of disconnect with this, even the same denomination. We've got rules and regulations that apply up north that you actually burn in hell forever for, and down here the preacher's smoking. And I was very active in bringing Marines out and very active in working with the navigators, and they asked if I would be the associate pastor for the Marines. They already had associate pastor for the Navy, and so this is something I willingly accepted. And at that ordination, they gave me a bright red Young's Analytical Concordance. Now, is about a year later, I reach up into this locker up in Washington, D.C. to get this after 3 days of fasting, and I pass out. I wake up, and a Marine is picking me up off the floor, and he said, "What is that book?" I began to explain it to him, and we became constant companions for the next several years. Daniel Rangel came to the Lord because I led him there as we were sitting on our bunks and began to teach him about the Scriptures. We both got orders, the 2nd Marine Division, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. We got down there 2 days later. We were put on a ship, the USS Francis Marion, on a Caribbean cruise. And as soon as I got on the ship, the Navy lost all of my uniforms except for the daily utilities that I was wearing. And for the next 3 weeks, I couldn't change my clothes. I went from the absolute pinnacle of spit and polish Marine Security Guard Battalion, and then for 3 weeks wearing the same thing out at sea. I looked like an absolute bird. And while I was out there, they looked at my record book and realized that I may have more talent than what I looked like. And so they put me in charge of the unit diary, which is a particular typewriter that writes in a computer code on a particular paper that this is how the Marines take care of the daily routine and reporting that goes to Kansas City. So I had to learn this computer language and to learn to type this, and so they put me in the company office. On the Francis Marion, the company office is with all the company offices in one room. I went down into this room to begin my training, and right underneath the clock, they had this gross pornographic picture. And it was there for a few hours in this room of about 40 Marines. It was there for a few hours after I first went down there. And with no one knowing me, I went over and I took it down, I watered up, I threw it in the trash, and then the screaming and the yelling began. I said, this is my office now, and I'm not going to have that in my office. And the first sergeant said, Rood, I think you better be careful here. And after lunch, another one was up. I went over there and tore it down again. And the rest of the guys in the company office took me out to keep me safe from the rest of the guys there. And wasn't too long after that we landed in Panama. We went out into the jungle, but because I had to have a generator for running this particular computer, they put us in this blown out building in the Panamanian jungle. And we all went up and were stationed upstairs. We had mattresses that were brought in, and we sat on the mattresses and did our work during the day. We sat on and laid on the mattresses at night. We did the work of the company office there, and I kept my mouth shut. People knew where I was coming from to some degree, and every day at lunchtime, I sat there and I opened up my Bible and I just read quietly. The guys in the company office that really didn't know me, they would be snickering. Who's this guy reading the Bible? And on the third day, the sergeant came over to me and he sat down and said, Rood, what are you reading? I said, I'm reading about the end of the world. He said, what? I'm reading about the end of the world. And I began telling him as I was going through the book of Zechariah, began sharing some things with him, and then others gathered around. And then the whole company office sat around for the next 6 hours until the sun went down. Nobody went back to work that day. Within a few days, we were on the ship on the way to Caracas, Venezuela. When now these guys are my friends. They like me. They're going to do what Marines do. We get to Caracas, Venezuela. They said, hey, we're going to go get a hotel room. We're going to, we're all going to stay there. We're going to get drunk. You want to come along? And I thought, nah, that's not what I like to do. And so Dan Rangel and I decided we were going to do something completely different. Dan Rangel and I, from Washington, D.C., now we're in Caracas, Venezuela together. That we walk downtown and we find this old church. It's a Catholic church, a huge place. Daniel is fluent in Spanish. He is Hispanic. And so we went into this courtyard, and it was completely desolate. And there was a bell in the middle of the courtyard. And so we went over to the bell, and we began ringing this bell. And then, like a herd of penguins from the Antarctic, the second balcony was filled with 3 rows of nuns in full habitry. We did not realize that we had called an official nun formation. And Mother Superior shouted down, Daniel answered her, and here are 2 bald-headed, shaved, polished Marines down there ringing the bell. And when they found out who we were and where we were from, all the nuns just burst into laughter and they all went back to work. They took us over to see the padre, and we began talking with him, and we began talking about what he referred to as the great chastisement, about the coming tribulation that will come upon the earth. He invited us to share in some brandy that the monks had made over in France, and even though it was nasty, we obliged, and he gave us a bunk there that night. We stayed with the priest there and at that church, got up in the morning, and as we left, I said, Daniel, we need to get some Bibles. We walked downtown Caracas, Venezuela, found a Bible bookstore and walked in there, and we were discussing this. I need to get some Bibles. These guys are starting to get interesting. I need a few Bibles. We walked in, and Daniel told the person behind the counter, we need some English Bibles, some King James Version English Bibles. And she said to him, we don't have any. He communicated to me, no English here at all. And so we were standing there talking about it, and a man from the back room came out speaking fluent English, a little broken, but he said, you need English Bibles? And I said, yes. And he went in the back room and bought out an entire case of Bibles and put them on the counter and opened it up. And so then I took out 4 Bibles, and he said, no, take them all. You're going to need them all. I said, we're on a Navy ship. We have no room. The Navy doesn't give Marines room on the ship. Give me a few. He said, no, you're going to need them all. Take the entire case. A man came here several years ago and left them with me, and we've been waiting for the person that needs these. And so, what was I going to say? Put the case of books on our shoulder. Daniel and I took turns carrying this case of books back to the ship. We got to the top of the gangplank, and I set the case of books on the top. Daniel saluted, request permission to come aboard. Right then, across the deck, 3 Marines came running from the company office and said, Rood, you'll never believe what happened. And I'm sitting there balancing this case of Bibles on the edge, and they reported to me, as we stood there, what took place the night before. He said that, Lance Corporal said, I took your book, The Late Great Planet Earth. I took that, and we all checked into the hotel. There were 13 of us, Marines and Navy. Everyone was getting ready. We're ready to go out to the bars, and I started reading some of this out loud, and we didn't go anywhere. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, the sergeant said, what do we do? You know, if this is really true that Jesus Christ might return, that these things may be true, what Rood has been reading us out of Zechariah, if this is true, what do we do? Another person said, well, you know, I've never done this before, but I've been to church. I think we need to get down on our knees and ask Jesus to come into our hearts. And so those 13 Marines and sailors got down on their knees in that bedroom, and then the next day they're telling me this story. I've got a case of Bibles in my hands, and before the morning was out, every one of those Bibles was gone. 40 Bibles were gone and being spread all over the deck of this USS Francis Marion. We pushed out, we were out to sea for one day, and a gentleman from the Navy, a signal officer, came down and said, I just sent a message over to the admiral. The captain of the ship's called for a chaplain. He said, there's some kind of damn revival going on over here. Get a chaplain here immediately. And so a couple hours later, Chaplain Griga landed on the fantail in a chopper. And so a Catholic chaplain showed up just in time to quell the revival. No, he started having an official Bible study. And everyone was flocking into this Bible study. And then one by one they began to trickle out. By the second day there was no one there, and they were sitting up on the deck with me as Marines, groups of Marines and sailors were sitting all around reading the scriptures together. As we got to Vieques, Puerto Rico, the other chaplain who was in the fleet, at the end of the day said that this is the largest baptism that we have ever done outside of a wartime situation. You know, when you're ready to go into combat, everybody gets baptized. But there's nothing going on. There's peace in the world. But yet, the move of the Spirit was to drive these men to that. We landed back in Camp Lejeune, got back there, and that wasn't the end of the adventure for me. I got back there, and some serious things began to take place. I got sent down to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. And down there you've got hours to do nothing. Sit on post, watching over the Cuban-American border, waiting for Cuban refugees to make it through the Cuban minefields, and then when they get to our fence and get over, then we have to arrest them so they don't go through our minefields. Once in a while you hear a mine go off where a family are trying to make it through the minefields. They have the oldest males, the grandfathers go first, and then the people follow in their footsteps, and you know when one of the old ones have died and they just keep on coming. They get to the other side of the fence, we arrest them so they don't go into our minefields, and we send them back. Closest I ever came to combat, post 20, when two drunk sailors rowed a boat up the Guantanamo River and got cut down by a .50 caliber machine gun up the way. There was a lot of screaming that night. They both lived, lost limbs, but it was on the guard truck on the way home that night, picked up at midnight. We were right in the guard truck, probably about 15 Marines that were being changed out in duty, and I got hit in the eye with a big beetle, a big insect. And they took me immediately over to the Navy, where I went to see the corpsman in the dispensary, and they took me into a room, turned the lights off, and saw that I'd cut my cornea very badly. I couldn't, the pain was excruciating. I couldn't stand any light. And as I lay there on the table, I looked up at the corpsman, and I said, God is going to heal me. And he said, what? I said, God is going to heal me. You're going to see God heal me. Now, I've never said this before in my life. This is not something you learn in Baptist Sunday school. And he said, okay. And they put some antibiotic in my eye. They patched up and said, we can't do anything for you tonight. You've got to come see the doctor in the morning. Got back in the morning, and the corpsman was still there. They took me in the room. They took the patch off my eye, completely healed. And the doctor's there when they take the patch off. And he looks at my eye and said, there's nothing wrong with this man's eye. And both corpsmen were there, and he said, well, last night there was something seriously wrong with his eye. And so they stepped over to the side, and I heard the corpsman said, he told me last night God was going to heal him. And he just shook his head and walked out. I didn't see these guys again. For another year, I was back in North Carolina, walking to the chow hall, and down the street, I saw this corpsman come at me. I said, we're having a fellowship over at our house tonight. Would you like to come? And he said, absolutely. I saw God heal you a year ago in Cuba. It changed this man's life completely. There were things that happened as I began to learn to listen and to walk by the Spirit. We were having a fellowship in our the barracks in the area there, and so many things happened. It's hard to, it just encapsulate it down. But coming back from Cuba, I was a bit depressed because there was just nothing seemed to be happening, and that is when I came down with a fever. I was in bed for days, and when I got out, I was like sick with depression. Walked out into the back squad bay, and there was a piece of paper blowing in the wind. I picked it up, and it was something from the children of God. Now, on a Marine base, you don't see things from, the hippie commune children of God too often. And I looked at this. The only thing I knew about the children of God was the Crosby, Stills, Nash Young song on the road to Woodstock. I don't know what the children of God was. But I looked at this, and I said, there's something here. And I sat up on the third deck of the squad bay, and I was back there praying, and I said, Lord, show me how to find these people. And then right then, someone walked up the back squad bay, up the back stairs, and looked at me and said, would you like to go to a Children of God meeting tonight? I said, yes. We got in the car, went out there. And it's a commune. It's a hippie commune. I mean, we are all, we are Marines. We shave our head. We polish them. And here we are with a bunch of hippies out there. And the guy had to leave early. They said they'd return me home later. And so I stayed, and we got into a serious Bible study. At the end, we got in this old 48 Chevrolet, and they hit the key, and the dome light went dim. I mean, it didn't roll over at all. And they said, okay, let's praise the Lord. So they all started praising the Lord, and I was hearing things I'd never heard before in Baptist church. Was going on in that car, and it was filled with people, and I thought, well, this is real cute, but somebody's got to get some jumper cables. They stopped, completely silent, hit the switch, that thing started just like that, and I thought, what in the world? The next night I came back, people laid hands on me, and that is when I found out what it was to be baptized, filled to overflowing with the Holy Spirit. It changed my life. I didn't go home that night. They had a bunk there. I stayed in the bunk. I got up in the morning, and standing in the kitchen, I had my Bible there, and Emmanuel said, I want to show you something. He opened to Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, and began reading, where the angel told Daniel, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon Jerusalem to finish the transgression, to make an end to sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to anoint the most holy, and to bring in everlasting righteousness. Know this, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem and the Messiah the Prince will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The wall will be built again, and the street in troublous times. And after 62 weeks, Messiah would be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall. He put his greasy finger on my Bible, indelibly etching it forever in my mind. Nobody ever touches my Bible with a greasy finger from the kitchen. And he stained my Bible from 24 through 27. And when I left there that morning, I knew that I had to get the answer to what that prophecy was about. And I was driven for the next 30 years. That happened just before going to Cuba. When I came back from Cuba, I went back out to that commune. On the way out there, I heard an audible voice that said, "They're not here. It's for the best." I kept walking down that road. I got there. It was overgrown. It was gone. I went back to the base, crying out, okay, where do I go? What do I do from here? Sitting out after a morning of guard duty underneath the tree, I was reading the scriptures. A Marine walked by and said, "Would you like to go over to a fellowship over at the chapel this afternoon?" I said, "Well, why? What's going on over there?" "Oh, the chaplain over there, he's on fire. You got to come over." I said, "A chaplain on fire?" Highly unlikely. I went over there and I sat down in a group of about 12 guys. The chaplain looked at me and never took his eyes off me. For the next hour, just hammered one thing after another. And I said, "Where did you learn this?" And he said, "Well, I read this book, and it really has deeply affected my life. There's some girls that are coming in from East Carolina University. They're going to start a fellowship tonight, and maybe you want to go over there." So I went over that night. I took a group of Marines with me over that night, and it was a Bible study, and they were teaching just basic principles of how the Bible interpreted itself, and it's really interesting. But a lot of this stuff I'd learned back in Baptist Sunday school and in the golden keys to Scripture interpretation, and so there wasn't anything real new, but the fellowship was really great. And so that is the night I was introduced to what I then later found out to be a cult. As if the Baptist church wasn't. The children of God. Now, here I am, as a group called The Way. And so I went out to this fellowship and came back, and the chaplain and I talked about some things, and then they were going to do this class called Power for Abundant Living. I wasn't going to take this class. I didn't want to join anything. I enjoyed the fellowship, but I wasn't going to take this class, and so others, that I introduced to them, they were going to take the class. But the night it started, I walked in, paid my $85 to take this class, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this thing. There were things in there I didn't really agree with. I had opposing opinions on some stuff, but, I disagree with a lot of things out there. This wasn't anything new at this point. But what I saw is that in this class is basically what I was taught in Baptist church of how to really read and understand the Scriptures, because that's one of the things that the Baptists really pride themselves on, is to really read and research and memorize the Scripture. And so, things were fitting there. And at the end of that, I saw that, these guys that I had been leading and working with the navigators and all for years, they took this class and they were on fire. They were, conversant in the Scripture. And I thought, man, this is a really great tool. These people are so far ahead of where I've been able to take them over the last year or so, just in 2 weeks. And so I came back for a second class, and then they said, we're leaving. You're in charge. Okay, I'm in charge of this organization now. So I started running these classes all the time. Before I'm through, I will have run more of these classes than anyone else in this entire ministry of tens of thousands of people all over the world, except for one person. One person ran more classes than I did. But why was I doing it? Because I saw the change in the lives of people that still to this day, their lives were transformed because they were taught how to read and understand the Scripture. Not pull out little numbered sound bites and all, but yet, some of the conclusions that were come to, it doesn't really fit, doesn't work. And so I was free. I was on my own. I used this as my tool. This is my world. I was running more of these classes than anyone else in North Carolina, and so people realized that I've got some talent to do this type of thing. The Marines came to me and offered. Now I'm a sergeant in the Marine Corps. Oh, I forgot to tell you that this chaplain, Wayne Niederhuth, he then came to me and said, "How'd you like to help me run the chapel program? This is your office here. We'll run the whole program together, and we'll shake things up." I said, "Okay, let's do it." And I had taken this class, Wayne hadn't, and he later confessed that he said to a group of people that went out to thousands of people out there, he said, after a couple of weeks of having this guy in my office as my clerk, I realized that this enlisted clerk knew more about the Bible than I did. And so he decided to take this class. We started running these classes for the Marines. And at the end of my time, they came to me, offered me staff sergeant if I would stay in, but I thought it doesn't get any better than this. I did what I believe was God's will while I was in the Marines for those 4 years. I ran the base chapel there at Camp Geiger and ran classes, and then it was time to leave. And so I went into the leadership program of this particular organization, which is develops into what's tantamount to a seminary, learning Hebrew, Greek, and practical application of things. And at the end of this, I went in using my VA bill, but then they were disqualified because they didn't meet certain government standards. And so I ran up quite a bill with my schooling. And at the end of it, I had a big bill for both my wife and I to pay. As a matter of fact, I married the girl that was running that fellowship 6 months after I met her. And 6 years later, we had our first of 4 daughters, Lee, who's with us in the Religious Systems Anonymous group today. And then they said that we would like you to run Washington, D.C. Well, this is a very prestigious position. I said, well, I've got a big bill to pay. He said, it's done. It's paid. If you'll do this for the ministry, your entire education is on the house. So I went to Washington, D.C. They gave me enough people to start 50 fellowships in the area. We flooded the Washington, D.C. We attacked Capitol Hill, and we started fellowships all over that area. And then I started to see some seedy things going on behind the scenes. One of our fellowship coordinators, he sent his wife out to Kansas. They had just had their first child. The child was just a few months old. He sent her out there to take this advanced Bible class. When she came back, something was wrong. He called me up, and he didn't know what was wrong, but something was wrong. And then a couple weeks later, I went out to their house and spoke to them, and she was just like stone, like ice. And he was crying like a baby. Somebody out there, one of the leaders, had seduced her, and she became his play toy. One of the leaders of the ministry. So I called up the man that was to become the head of this ministry, who had knew I was in this organization in the Way Corps, right out of the Marine Corps, and there were things going on that they had me do that they told my wife that your husband, they may disappear anytime, day or night, and when he says, I'm leaving, that's all I'm going to say, I'm leaving. And then I never explained anything to anyone. Everyone knew that, I was doing some background things that they trusted me to do, that I had the ability to get done, nothing illegal, but that I was entrusted to do this. And so now I call this man that gave me that assignment, who is going to become the president of this organization, and I told him that you find out who did this, and you take care of this, or I'm going to get on a plane, I'm going to bring a knife with me, and we're going to make sure that this person never has another opportunity to have any children. And he knew I was serious. I found myself with 3 children and without a job. And then I started to find out some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. There was a big clergy meeting, hundreds and hundreds of clergy, all called together, and I had it with this organization. I started to see some things going on behind the scenes, and I said, if you want me there, you pay for me to be there. You pay my plane ticket, and I'll be there. I sat in this meeting, and someone got up front and said, if anyone even has read something that my friend John Schoenheit wrote. I hadn't seen John in years. I knew he was in the research department. But they said if anyone has even read it, they will never have another part of this ministry leadership again. I realized I hadn't read it. I had no idea what they're talking about. And so I walked out of the room. I found his number. I called him and I said, John, send it to me. Anybody that tells me I can't read something or I can't listen to somebody that's trying to shield me from information, you better believe it, I am going to go right over their head. Now, I've got one Lord, one Messiah. No one stands in the middle. Someone keeping things from me. Well, I found out what it was. I found out that the leader of this group was a lecherous sex pervert. And that had just gone through the entire upper echelons of this ministry. Men in their 50s and 60s that were seducing through their power teenage girls, virgins. When I found out what was going on, and the girls that had killed themselves, and the abortions by the dozens, I was so sickened by this thing. For years, my Bible lay closed with dust on it. The depression of friends who blew their brains out. A dark, dark time. Every time I opened the scriptures, all I could hear is their voices yelling, their doctrines being spewed out. I couldn't hear the voice of Almighty God through all the garbage that had been piled on it for all those years. And I realized it had been years since I heard the voice of the Lord. Years. Ended up moving down to San Antonio. I opened a book that I'd read 15 years earlier, In His Steps, Charles Sheldon. I got down on my knees by the bed and I said, Lord, I want to hear your voice one more time before I die. Within a few weeks, my life was turned upside down. My wife told me that she was leaving me. Actually, I was leaving them. That's what I was informed. And within a week, I sold my Colt Gold Cup 45 automatic with a 3-pound trigger because when I took it out of my mouth, I knew I couldn't pull the trigger. I knew I couldn't die, but I knew I was lost. And I began walking hours and hours and hours. I couldn't sleep at night. I found what I could do. I could walk 3 or 4 hours till I was completely exhausted. Then I would turn around and walk back. And then I could pass out. Week after week, month after month, living in a tent under a radar scattering camouflage net on the back of a military base. I said, Lord, I'm not moving until you speak to me. I'd get up in the morning, go into the club, put on my suit, go into the office, try to act normal, but I'm not budging until I hear. And then finally the word came, told me what to do. Go drive a truck. I knew that didn't mean, getting a pickup. I went into the office, closed the door, opened the paper, and I found out to be a truck driver, you had to be educated. So I took a leave of absence from Westinghouse, and then on the morning of December 5th, 1994, I woke up in the morning on my birthday, and I was getting ready to walk into truck driver school, and I took my razor and I threw it in the trash. I thought, there's nobody here I need to impress. And I got out on the road, over the road truck driver, because I knew that's what I was supposed to do. And over the miles and the months, then the Holy Spirit ministering to me and began leading me. And I realized that, all of a sudden I was delivered. I was set free during that period of time. When I read the scripture, I no longer heard the voices of the denominations of the past and the cults and all. I was hearing a fresh word, and it was cleansing. It was changing my heart and life. And I got out on the road, and I had been into the grace perversion. And even though I didn't get into the rampant immorality that was going on in this cult, yet I was using grace as a license to live however I wanted to. And I realized that, what's in my heart is I want to be obedient. But I don't know anything to be obedient to. And then it came back, that haunting thing that I heard over and over and over. The haunting of what I saw at the Woodland Mall Theater just before going to the Marine Corps, when I went in and watched Fiddler on the Roof, and the opening scene where the family is gathered around the table. And that Jewish family, as the candles are lit, and they're praying, and they're beginning the Sabbath, as the screen went black and that violin was crying out into the night, I knew I had missed something my whole life. I knew from my grandmother that, our family came from Amsterdam. I know that Michael Rood had started the first Ashkenazi synagogue in his home in Amsterdam. I knew that her family came right from there, but also knew that we had Methodist preachers in our background. One came over with John Wesley, horseback riding circuit rider. And, at that time, if you're a Christian, you're not Jewish. But yet through the years, things kept on haunting me. In Washington, D.C., our firstborn is about to be delivered. And so I get a hold of Rabbi Goldberg, and I say, I make an appointment for him to come and circumcise my firstborn. And everyone in the ministry is saying, what are you doing? What's all this Jewish stuff? I mean, what are you doing? And I said, it has to be done. It has to be done. And when my firstborn was a girl, 8 days later, I had a friend, and he had a son that was born. I said, your son is going to be circumcised on my dining room table. Rabbi Goldberg came over and did it. Somebody's going to get circumcised. It has to be done. So we picked the smallest guy, 8 days old, on the dining room table. Years later now, I'm on the road, and the first thing that hits me is the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. And so as a truck driver, I began keeping the Sabbath. Shut down the truck on Friday night. I'd take some bread and wine and head out to the nearest hilltop. And I would break the bread. I would drink the grape juice. I was a truck driver. I wasn't using wine. And I would just fellowship with the Lord. Sometimes I couldn't keep the truck still. I had to get back on the road after a few hours and keep going. But after a couple weeks, every night, Friday night sundown, it was a miraculous thing that was it. I could shut the truck down, didn't have to start up until Saturday night again at the end of Shabbat. And it was happening week after week like this. I was seeing such incredible favor that I began sharing this with others and other truck drivers. There's so many stories to tell you about what happened out there on the road, but this one that I knew that I was in the will of the Almighty. I was just... I was on the road after schooling. I was on the road with our trainer. We stopped in at Oklahoma. And here's the trucker's chapel there, which is, a big 48-foot box trailer sitting at the truck stop there. I walked inside, and I would always wear, nice khaki slacks and a blue pinpoint Oxford button-down shirt, typical truck driver's uniform with an alligator belt and yeah. And I walked in there and sat down. There was a desk there. I sat down there and I was praying, and the door opened. A truck driver walked in with a big chain drive wallet, black shirt, Harley Davidson hat. He walked in, looked at me, tears started streaming down his face, and he said, I was hoping to find a chaplain here. I said, sit down, brother, what's on your heart? You know, that was 5 minutes after I walked in. Now I'm the chaplain. Well, turned out his wife left him. Something I couldn't have related to just a year before. But I was able to minister to him. And as he left, I sat there and I prayed, and I thanked God that he was able to use me again. After years of depression. He walked out. 5 minutes later, another person opened the door, looked in and said, oh, I was hoping to find a chaplain here. I said, brother, what's on your heart? And I'm going to be a truck driver for the rest of my life. Because I could see that the Almighty could use me. I didn't control my schedule. A computer on the dash told me where I was going, when I was picking up, when I was delivering. And every day I was seeing divine appointments. Was driving across the California desert. The sun is setting. I pull off to this rest area, and there's a man standing there by himself looking at the sunset. And I stood there a little ways away from him, and I turned to him and I said, is this just all the result of millions of years of aberrant chance mutations in a purely mechanical universe, or is there a God out there? We spent the next 4 hours in my truck as I ministered to him. It was like every day. I thought, you know, maybe I ought to win the lottery or something and buy myself a truck and do this the rest of my life. You know, it was like, this is it. It doesn't get any better. And then something happened. I was down on the Mexico border to pick up a load at Laredo. You usually get great loads going out of Laredo that take you days to deliver up into Canada. But I went up to the dispatch window and they called my name. I went up there and they said, sorry to have to do this, but I have to give you this load. It's going to Houston. Oh, you know, there are 5 loads that had to go to Houston just a few miles away, and it's got to be delivered. You're going to be sitting there for days. Everyone knew what that meant, and I just got through praying that my next load would be taking me on the path that God has for me. And so I said, well, thank you very much. And he said, you know, the last guys I gave this to, they yelled, they screamed, they were so furious. I said, no, this is God's will. I took the load, I stepped out, and a man, Lee Ware, got out of his truck, came over to me and just walked up to me and gave me a hug, and he said, brother, you saved my life. I said, what are you talking about? It was months ago that I had talked to him, ministered to him, and it turned his life around, and he said, I was praying for you, and the Lord told me you're not going to be here very long. Oh, really? I wanted to do this the rest of my life. I'm not going to be here long? Well, it wasn't particularly good news at that point, but I got that load, got to Houston, picked up another one, and I'm on my way to Canada now. And on the way there, the sun is about to set, and I don't have the time to do this. I calculate it while I'm driving, and I see if I shut the truck down, I can make it. If shut down over the Sabbath, I can make it. But it's not safe. It's not wise. And I prayed, Lord, if you want me to shut down on the Sabbath, then you have to give me a sign. You have to show me something. Right then, the screen lit up, and I'm praying out loud. In the truck, you get to talk to the Lord out loud, and nobody knows how nuts you are. I mean, you can talk to him for hours and hours and hours. And I'm talking to him out loud, and you got to show me a sign. Right then, the computer screen lights up. Monday is Victoria Day in Canada. You can't deliver the load till Tuesday. Here's the exit sign to a rest area. I swing the truck in, slam the brakes on, pull it to a stop, and somehow I know this Sabbath is going to be a special day. The next morning I got up, went over to the stone picnic table, I laid my Bible down, and it just opened right up to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. One of the most well-worn pages in my Bible, and it just, broke open to that. It would be a few months later before my Bible now breaks open to Leviticus on the feast of the Lord. Now, whenever you lay it down. But then, it was all about the return of the Messiah. I opened it up and I began reading. It's covered with notes and colors. I've been writing in this thing for years. And I prayed, and I said, Lord, you know that I don't know what this says. And I know it doesn't say how I've been interpreting it, because my job was teaching the pre-tribulation rapture. When the Way wanted somebody to teach the pre-tribulation rapture for their whole enclave of digestive teachings, they called on me to do it. I could teach the pre-tribulation rapture for 6 hours and never have to open the Bible. I memorized it all. I could teach the pre-tribulation rapture blindfolded, being hung by my heels. But yet I wasn't comfortable with the way I was handling some things, and I didn't feel it was honest. And it was that day that the scales came off my eyes. That day sowed the seeds to the mystery of iniquity. I was shaking at the end of that day because I knew that if I spoke what I just saw, and I knew that heaven had opened, that I would lose all my friends. There'd be nothing left. I am about to say something that goes against everything I have ever been taught in every religious system out there. The replacement theology of the Baptist Church and of the Way International. The pre-tribulation rapture that the Way was teaching so adamantly, and the numerous thing. Everything was just completely torn apart. And I got on the road and I was in tears as I pled. You've got to show me something. I've got to see a sign from heaven. I can't open my mouth and say this. It will destroy my life. And then it was confirmed. I can't go into the details of it now. But when it was confirmed by a man who had ordained me years before, he was involved in the ordination service. I traveled across the country. I heard he was there, and I'm not going to open my mouth. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to ask him to pray for me. When he prayed for me, he then prophesied. He spoke the very words that the Almighty used for me to open my eyes, and I knew then, as he said, I have to open my mouth and speak it. I did. I began that day, and that person turned away from me. A friend for years, a mentor for years, he turned away. Another person turned away. Every friend that I had out there turned away because I was challenging a religious system that has permeated America. And I lost all my friends. I'm sitting in Arkansas, just delivering a load, and I get back, as my tradition is, and get back on my knees, back at my bunk back there in the back of this Kenworth, and I pray again about the next load and where I'm supposed to be, that I'll be prepared and get me ready for what is the next load. I get up into the driver's seat, and I've got no load assigned. I've had plenty of rest. I pull up the map, open it in front, and I'm just looking at the whole map of the U.S. And all of a sudden, Thunder Bay, Canada, the words come off the page, and they look like they're about 3 inches tall, and I shout out loud, Lord, I need to go to Thunder Bay. Lord, I need to go to Thunder Bay. I don't know anything about Thunder Bay. But I mean, it just lit up right off the page. Thunder Bay, as soon as I opened it up, it was a phenomena. And, later on I found out our trucking company, CFI, never trucks in or out of Thunder Bay. We never go there. It's just completely out of the way. We don't go there. But I said, Lord, I need to go to Thunder Bay. And I thought, well, I will call the dispatcher and say, if there are any loads that ever go to Thunder Bay, put me on it. That's what I figure I'm going to do. Now, I know that they're working to get me a load down to Laredo, where I'm going to pick up a load. Then they're going to send me up to Michigan. I'm going to pick up my 2 oldest daughters, put them on the truck, and go to Michigan, where I'm going to spend Christmas with my parents. And all the girls are going to come up together. We're all going to be there. And so I know the schedule's already figured out. I know that's what the plan is. And as I'm sitting there, I then close the book, I put it to the side, and then up on the computer screen, load assigned. I push the button, Thunder Bay, Canada. Whoa! I just get chills, because I know there's something waiting, but I have no idea what it is. I start driving. It's going to take 2 days to get up there. And I stop the truck. It's the winter time, and I spend as soon as I stop the truck after my 10 hours of driving, I get back there and I start reading the scripture, and I'm in the book of Revelation. And then I hear a voice in my head, and I speak it out. I didn't hear an audible voice, and I said, you're going to find 2 people, and you're going to teach them the book of Revelation. 2 people. You're looking for 2 people. You're going to teach them the book of Revelation. I know. That's my assignment. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm on my way now. And so, after I sleep, I take off and go. I'm on my way to Thunder Bay. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be there on Sunday. I'm going to go into a church. I'm going to then wait for the Lord to show me who are the 2 people. This is where I'm going. I drive through the night. And the snow is so deep, they have plowed Route 53 up in northern Wisconsin open, but there's no way to pull a truck off. I'm past my hours. I go through Superior. I'm way over hours, but I am alive. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I am so excited and enthused about getting up to Thunder Bay. I think, well, I'll go through the border. I'll drive through the night. I'll drive a 16-hour day, which I don't do, but I'm going to do that because there's no place to pull the truck off. And so I get through Superior. I go past Duluth. I'm going on up the North Shore of Lake Superior, and I look off to the side, and the snow is falling. 3 o'clock in the morning. I see this steeple with the cross on it, and I think, what a quaint northern experience this is in the middle of the night. I'm on my mission. And I get on past there, and I look to the left. There are the road graders are scraping out a parking lot, and I'm about to get under this trestle, and I hear a voice, and I shouted out, "Whoa, turn this thing around." I pull into the parking lot, turn it around, and find a place to park the truck right there, because I heard that voice that said, "Turn this thing around." I turned the truck around, I shut it off, and now I know I'm going to go back to that little white church in the morning. I oversleep. I put on my suit. All truck drivers keep a 3-piece suit in the truck, just in case. I put on my suit, and I walk back about a half mile to the church. I walk in the back door, I see it says evangelical free. I walked in there and I said, "Well, sir, the price looked right." And I sat down December 17th. It was that morning. And they were doing the Christmas program, and it was beautifully done. It really was a beautifully done nativity situation. And afterward, I turned to a man sitting beside me, and I said, that was really beautiful. That was really moving. I really felt like, it made the scripture come alive. There was real humanity to it. And he looked at me and said, we really need to hear that here. We've gone through a tough time, and our pastor left, and he's out driving a truck now. I said, well, he's going to get healed. See, there's nothing to prove out there on the road. No sermons to concoct. Nobody to impress. It's just you and the Heavenly Father. And if you can't get it together then, you ain't getting it together. I have to stop and tell you something. I work for a pretty big company, CFI, out of Joplin, Missouri. And we have little terminals all over the country. One of them is in the Kansas City, Missouri. This is Missouri side. I had a load in there. I came in there. It's just a little terminal, not that many drivers. It's just a transit point. I sat down there at the table in the lunchroom, which has about 3 tables in it, at noon one day, and I began speaking with another driver, began sharing the scripture with him. And I sat there all day. At 6 o'clock that night, there were 6 ordained clergy from 6 different denominations sitting around that table, all truck drivers for this one firm that ended up at that one place at that one time. And as we went around the table and found out how every one of them had been burned by their denomination, every one of them, their lives were destroyed. And they all started driving a truck just to get out away from the system and to get their life healed. And every one of them, their life was healed. And I was talking with this one gentleman, just fascinated with him, and I said, I have got a book I want to give you. I know that you'll really connect with him. So it's a book by Francis Schaeffer. He says, Francis Schaeffer? In my truck, I've got several letters from Francis Schaeffer. He's a personal friend of mine. And, you know, just the connections that were being made. That's why I thought, I'll do this the rest of my life. Well, here's another pastor turned truck driver. He's gone. And the man beside me said, well, we're going to have a potluck here. Would you like to stay? And I said, well, I've got no place to go. And, I thank you for the invite. So we went through this line in northern Minnesota. The buffets at church, everything has tomato sauce on it. They're good cooks up there, but what they bring into these buffets is terrible. I mean, the pumpkin pie has tomato sauce on it. I'm sitting at this table, group of people, gentlemen across the side, and people began asking questions. This woman was asking me questions, and I was answering, and she looked at me very seriously and said, "Are you an angel?" I said, "No, ma'am, I'm not an angel." I thought if she needed any backup, I could make any number of phone calls to prove that one. And it turned out her husband, the man I sat beside, looked at me and he said something else. And right then, these are the people. I didn't answer him. He said, no, he's not an angel, he's a prophet. And I know what a prophet is, not one foretell the future, one who speaks the message that they've been given to speak. I didn't answer him. I said, I don't have to be in Thunder Bay until tomorrow morning, which means I need to leave at 1 o'clock tonight. If there's anything you want to do today, I'm available. And the woman, Bonnie Phipps, said, well, we were going to decorate our Christmas tree today, but we can put that off. Would you like to come over? And so I did. They called their friends, family together, and for the next 6 hours, I laid out the book of Revelation. They said, you've got to come back and teach this. You've got to come back and teach this. And I said, well, this is probably the only time. I just found out that we never go to Thunder Bay. This is the one time that there's 2 shipments going up. I'm one of them. So I get up to Thunder Bay, I deliver the load, I turn around, come back into America, I pull the truck off to the side, I go into Buddy's rice house and to pick up some wild rice before I get out of there. And I walk in there and I start talking to these people, and before long I've got about 6 people there who are listening to me as I teach for a couple hours in Buddy's rice house. And they said, you've got to come back and teach this. I said, well, this is probably my only time here. And then it turns out that Gary Phipps, where I was there, he was one of the two, Gary and Bonnie Phipps, that he drove down the road and he saw this truck that was parked off the side of the road. So he started going around to all the bars in town, because that's the only thing that was open, looking for me. And he didn't look at Buddy's Rice House. And so he's driving around for a couple hours, and then I walk out of Buddy's Rice House. Just as I'm getting in the truck, he pulls over, and so we begin talking. I decide I'm going to stay the night. The next morning, I'm in my union suit in the back of the Kenworth, and someone is slamming on my door out there. I thought, oh, it's the cops. You know, I'm not parked in a particularly good spot there, but it's I thought would work. Someone's banging on the door. I look out there, and there's a group of 5 people outside of the truck door, and Bonnie Phipps is there. So I put on something over my union suit. I step out, and it's the UPS man who had stopped at our house earlier, and a few other people, and the dog groomer from Two Harbors. And they're standing out there, and so I stand out there, and we have a little seminar for about an hour outside the truck door there. And they said, you've got to come back and teach this. Okay, I think I've heard the word. I'm going to come back and teach. So I'm driving for months. And then it's in the spring of the year, I say, I'm going to come back. I park the truck, and I park it down in Detroit. That's as close as load I could get. And I get in a Greyhound bus, and I travel over 24 hours to get to Duluth. They pick me up, and I go to their house, and they've got it arranged for me to do a seminar there. And then they brought in a newspaper that had a big ad in it. The very same weekend I'm teaching in Two Harbors, there's a seminar called From Here to Eternity that this person is coming in and teaching. I think, my goodness, what a bad weekend. And then I look further down, and it's me teaching this seminar. From Here to Eternity. Okay. I have not opened my mouth and taught publicly in years. When I left the way, I left cold, I left dead, I left destroyed like so many other people. I got up in front of that group on Friday night, and I started to open my mouth. I started to speak, and I could hear demons screaming at me. I could not hear my own thoughts in my head. In front of that audience at the Superior Shores Hotel, I dropped on my knees right then, and I lifted my hands and I prayed. And when I got up off my knees, I was a teacher. I was not a teacher before that moment. That is when everything changed. It was a gift from heaven, not to me, to the body of believers. And it was over. I was done. Now, Gary Phipps told me that this is the true test, whether this thing's from God or not. As he introduced me and saying, you know, I'm sponsoring this, but if he says one thing wrong, I'm shutting this meeting down. Okay? Now talk. Well, thank you for that heartwarming opening, sir. He said, the true test. I have been trying to get my partner at the Environmental Protection Agency, National Lab, he's a scientist there, his partner, they worked together, played volleyball together. He said, this man is my soulmate. I love him like a brother, but he has never darkened the doorstep of a church. I've been trying to speak to him for years. Nothing. I can't get through to him. And if you can reach him, I will know this thing is of God. Well, his friend didn't show up that night. The next morning, his friends showed up there, and as I was teaching, we had a little break, and I found out that he went out and got on the phone and called his wife and said, "Get over here. You've got to get over here." Here's another woman, complete pagan, just a complete pagan. Just a carousing, never stepped into a door of a church. But he said, "You've got to get over here." And so she drove over. When the night closed, I was at the sixth seal, thermonuclear war in the book of Revelation. The two of them were standing in the back, physically shaking. See, I didn't know, I've never taught this before, I didn't know how far I would get that day, and I'm leaving everyone at the brink of thermonuclear ruin. And they are back there just shaking like leaves. Gary and Mary Holcomb, now, 13 years later, are sitting in our meeting today. I mikvahed them in a lake in northern Minnesota that it was so cold that day that all of the Minnesotans there were wearing military down stuffed jackets, hugging each other to stay warm. A woman with an accordion that came down there to play, tried to play it, and the accordion wouldn't play. It was frozen. Gary Holcomb, Mary Holcomb, and myself, with Gary Phipps, got down in the water, and that is where they were mikvahed, they were baptized. And then we walked a mile in those wet clothes back to the farmhouse that was 20 miles from the closest running water or electricity. And this is where we had a Feast of Sukkot. Well, I have to step back now. A few months, I had to step back to that meeting. And that Sunday, when it was over, and I knew that I had reached Gary and Mary, the offering was taken up. I paid the sound man, and there was not even enough left to put me on a Greyhound bus to get me out of there. This is already showing me the provision of the Almighty for me to do what I'm doing, it would seem. Monday morning, I stayed in the room that they gave me at the Phipps house, and I was just weeping in tears. I can't go back and get on that truck knowing what I know, knowing what's going to happen on the face of the earth. I cannot do that. But nothing else makes any sense. It's just the divine appointments are all there. I don't have to think. My needs are taken care of. I can do what needs to get done. And the idea of teaching full time, and that's all that I do, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. And so I prayed. And the only thing that came to me is, greater love has no man than this, than he lay down his life for his friends. It just kept coming back and back. And I just kept pleading. I said, Lord, speak to me. Ask me to walk out on the water with you. Just ask me. Let me hear from you. Just ask me to walk out on the water, and I will do it. I'll walk out on nothing. You've got to tell me. But it doesn't make any sense. I can't support myself. I can't even buy a bus ticket to get out of here after pouring my life out for 3 days after the miracle that was requested that Gary Holcomb's life would be changed. And yet, nothing. And finally, I laid there as I kept hearing, greater love has no man than this. And he laid down his life for his friends. And I said, okay, that's it. I am going to quit. I'm going to turn in the keys to this truck. And unless you stop me, I'm about to make the stupidest mistake I have ever made in my life. That's it. I'm quitting. I'm not driving a truck anymore. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I am going to warn the world. I went downstairs. Bonnie cooked some breakfast. I was sitting there with the kids. And Gary walked in. And he said, I never come home for lunch. But I was at the office, and I have never said this in my life. But the Lord told me to come here and tell you, walk out on the water with him. Every time that the Almighty has spoken to me in this, it has been a life-changing thing. When I say the Lord told me something, it's rare, and it doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, it is real. It is not made up. Now you know how I get so furious when people say, the Lord told me this, the Lord told me that. I just want to slap them upside the head, especially when they don't do what they say the Lord told them to do. I just want to bust their teeth out. You're a liar. You're a fake. You're a fraud. If you hear from heaven and you don't do it, you're the biggest idiot I've ever seen in my life. And if you've done that in your life, you need to repent and change, or heaven will go silent. There's no faking it. I got on that Greyhound bus, went back, turned in my keys, signed out, and here it is. It's 1996, the third day, the fourth month. I looked at the number of the truck, a brand new truck they gave me a year before, 9634. 1996, the third day, the fourth month. I wrote the number of the truck right underneath the date, handed them the keys, and I realized this is it. Walked away from it. A couple months later, I'm teaching out on the West Coast. A young man came up to me and said, they found Pharaoh's chariots strewn for 1.5 miles on the bottom of the Red Sea. We've got it on video. I said, what? I tried to hide my disbelief. I said, do you have a copy? Can you get it to me? He brought me a copy. The end of the next night, I had been teaching for 9 hours. I went home. I put it on. I went home where I was staying. I had no home. Put it on. I watched this. Yeah, not only that, found Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing site, the remains of the Ark in northern Turkey, the Ark of the Covenant. I thought, wait just a minute, the Ark of the Covenant, that is a little bit hard to believe. I rewound it, watched it again, all night long till 5 in the morning. I said, this is the greatest tool I've ever had in my hands. I got on a bus, went back to Minnesota. When I got there, on the way, I thought, what am I going to do? Why hasn't this spread like wildfire through the Christian church? If they really found these things, it's like, finding Pharaoh's chariots on the bottom of the Red Sea after all these years, it's like, this is the proof that evolution is a fairy tale. I mean, any moron can see it now, that the Hebrew scriptures are real. We've got coral-encrusted chariot parts on the bottom of the Red Sea, strewn on the bottom of this thing. I mean, what more do you want? I thought, well, if everyone did the same thing I did, then no one would ever hear about it. Because when I got that tape in my hands, from then, I went over to, I think, Larry and Michelle's place. Michelle is here today. And I shared it with them. And they got a group of people together and shared it with them. And so I shared it with about 20, 30, 40 people. But I thought, at this rate, I'll never get this word out. So I went up to Minnesota, got up to Two Harbors, and I went to every business. I walked inside, barbershops, the Ben Franklin store, the bank. I burst into the door, and I threw my hands out, and I said, you'll never guess what they found. And I would wait for somebody to say, okay, what did they find? They found Pharaoh's chariots and army strewn for 1.5 miles on the bottom of the Red Sea, and we've got it on video. I remember one man, he turned purple. He was so furious because I just took away all of his excuses for disbelief. I walked into the bank, threw the doors open, said the same thing, and the teller behind window 2 looked at me, and the tears started streaming down her face. This was the greatest treasure for her because it proved that the scriptures were real. I could see that I was about to enter into a hornet's nest on one end, and on the other side, those who were searching for the truth and were just hoping to grab onto more reality. I just realized that if I continued to tell this story that I'm telling right now, by leaving out most of the details of what took place, it'll still take me another 12 hours. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have to skip ahead in time for a moment. After several divine interruptions in my life, one of which I was out in the backwoods of northern Wisconsin, house sitting. I came out to speak one night. They took up an offering at the end of the night, and there was a family there that had some needs. I took the offering, put a rubber band around it, I gave it to them, but I saved a 100 dong Vietnamese note that was put in the offering. I have no idea what it's worth. $1 million, a quarter of a cent, I have no idea. I didn't go to Vietnam. 100 dong Vietnamese note, I stuck it in my pocket. And the next morning, I got up to leave, and just as I was leaving the door, saying goodbye to my host that night, the phone rang. He said, "Just a minute." And he went to the phone, and he said, "Well, he's here." And so I spoke to this person. This is a person I'd wanted to meet for years. This is a person that lived in northern Minnesota, and what I knew about him, everyone knew this story, that he was awakened in the middle of the night years earlier, in the middle of the night, in his cabin in the woods of northern Minnesota, and he woke up his wife and said, "The Lord just told me to pack a small bag and to go to Vietnam. He has something for me to do." So he packed up. He got in his vehicle, he drove down to Minneapolis, he got there at 5 o'clock in the morning. He called one friend that he knew that would be up and that he knew well enough to call at 5 in the morning. And he said, "The Lord woke me up and he told me to go to Vietnam. He has something for me to do." The man said, "Stop, don't go anywhere. We'll be there in an hour." "We will be there in an hour?" "Be there in an hour." In came two men. They sat down at the table, and he said, "Okay, tell this man what you just said." And he told him, and the two of them recognized that the Lord spoke to this other man that very day and said, "You are to pay for someone I need to get to Vietnam." He told this friend, who was the friend of the man who was told to go. That day, he was on his way to Vietnam. Saigon, within 2 weeks, was falling. The mortars were coming down. People were being machine gunned in the streets. He stepped out into the street in the middle of the mayhem, and it was as if a dome of silence was around him, and he heard the voice say, "I have 70 women and children that I need you to get out of here. They are hiding in the basement of a particular building." Showed him exactly where it was. He went down there and said, "Follow me." And he led them through the streets of Vietnam while Saigon was under fire. He got them out to the military base. The last people were getting out of there. They were in a building. He got everyone into a building. A bomb hit the building, blew the building down, flattened everyone, and within 2 minutes, a staff car pulled up, and they got out and grabbed him, put him in the staff car, and took this American who had all these Vietnamese women and children all on the tarmac there. It took him before the colonel, and he walked in and said the words that he was told to say. The Lord said, "I am supposed to do this." The colonel looked at him and said, "I don't care what the Lord told you. I'm telling you, you're on a plane, you're out of here. These people are not going." As they let him out of the office, he went by a guy that was putting bands on people, little tags on people. And he spoke to him and he said, "I've got 70 women and children that need to get on a plane out of here." The man, without looking, took his left hand, reached over into where the batch of tags was, put it in his hands and says, "Put these on them." He walked out and they had exactly 70 tags. Put them on the women and children, and they were on their way to America. He went back home to northern Minnesota, and now he's on the phone. He wants to see me. I speak to him a moment, and he said, I was 14 hours away from here in Illinois, and the Lord told me to come up and find you. I have a message for you. Okay, I'm on my way over there. Get over to his house, we begin speaking, and now I get to hear the story firsthand from him. And then I said to him that, and then he said, I have a friend that is going back over there. He was a Marine, he was wounded. The Vietnamese nursed him back to health in a cave, and after a couple weeks he was strong enough, they got him back to America, the Americans, and now he is going to go back to Vietnam and find these people and minister to them. And I said, I've got something for him. He said, wait right here. He went and made a phone call, and he looked back at me and he said, were you in the service? I said, Marines. He said, yes, Marines. I'm on my way. Hung up the phone. The guy walked in the door. I looked at him. I had seen this man a month before, and the Lord told me, you're going to see this man again. And here I am looking at him in the eyes. He walked in, and he said, and then the gentleman, Victor, introduced us, and he said, you're Michael Rood? And I said, yes. And he said, I was just up north, 2 hours north of here. I was working with a customer of mine. I'd been with him all morning. I'm backing out of the driveway. I'm at the end of the driveway, and he waves at me, flags me down, and he runs out to me, and I roll down the window, and he said, you need to go see Michael Rood as soon as you can. And he said, well, who's Michael Rood? And he said, don't worry about it. You'll know it. You'll find him. He drove out of that driveway 2 hours before, got back to his office, put the key in the lock as the phone rang. That was my friend calling him. And I'm looking at him face to face. He sits down at the table, and he then tells me the story of what happened to him in Vietnam and why he wants to go back, and he's waiting for the confirmation. And I said, I've got something for you. I pulled out a 100 dong Vietnamese note out of my shirt. I gave it to him, and he said, that is what I prayed for. God, heaven is alive and real. Heaven interrupts the course of the human race. It's not a fairy tale. He's on his way to Vietnam. When he comes back, we meet, and he prays for me. He says, I see you with a bunch of men with long beards. He said, there are a bunch of men with long beards standing at the wall in Jerusalem. He said, we're going to end up there, you know. Well, to tell you the rest of the story would be difficult, but what I was called there for is this gentleman said I was 14 hours away, Victor. And the Lord told me to come up and tell you that you need to go see Henry Gruver. He's going to be in Illinois in just a couple weeks. Gave me the time, the date. Everyone was going to go down there. A big group of us. I ended up being the only one. I went down there. I got in the room. It was absolutely packed except for the one seat right square in front of Henry Gruver. And that night, he told the story of how he met Ron Wyatt in Israel and the detail concerning the Ark of the Covenant that he was privy to. This was the Red Sea crossing, Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah's Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, all coming together in this one moment in time. And then I knew I had to go see Ron Wyatt. I called Ron on the phone right after I was with Henry for 2 days there. And I said, I need to come down and see you. And he said, why? You have some specific questions? And I said, yes, but, and I saw his hesitation. I heard it on the phone. I said, Ron, I believe if you'll pray, the Lord will tell you whether I'm supposed to come down or not. He said, call me back in 2 days. He said, when can you be here? I got down there, and then the rest of the confirmations came. And I then got linked in heart and knew that Ron Wyatt was real. And what he was saying was real. I worked with him a whole week, day after day. And in his home the last night, the confirmation came. And so I went down to Texas, and within a few weeks I was on my way to where there were a bunch of men with long beards in Israel. The adventures, the things that took place, as a matter of fact, I have to tell you one. Because on my way from Ron Wyatt's place to Texas, I was on the road and I was praying out loud and I said, Lord, teach me how to live on nothing. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I thought, oh, that was stupid. I said, okay, I don't take it back. I know that there's coming a time in which all the economic systems of this world are going to fail, and I need to know beforehand. And I left it alone. Through some incredible divine workings, I ended up in Israel. I got there. I had $50 to live on all summer. But in one night, bam, the money was laid in my hands. I knew what it was for. I bought my ticket. I had plenty of money left over. I went over to Israel, and I was there just a couple of days. And then all of my money, all of my recorders, all the electronics, everything was stolen from me. That was the morning that I met Mika and Shoshana Harari down at the harp shop. I had a $10 bill in my pocket. I came back to the room. Everything was gone. I was staying at the Petra Hostel at that point. And I have my plane ticket home, and I've got $10, and I've got 50 days to go. 50 days. This $10 has got to last me. Now, you don't lose all your money without doing stupid stuff. You know, you have to make mistakes. And so I kicked myself for about 3 days. And then finally I realized, as I was walking along the parapet, the top of the wall late one night, I said, okay, Lord, I prayed that you would teach me how to live on nothing. Here I am, 8,000 miles from home, no way to make a phone call. I wouldn't even know who to call. I'm your problem. You got to take care of me. Well, I will tell you that I made it. I never begged. I never asked for money from anyone. And I was able, I parsed this out because I'd already made advance payments at the hostel and all. And I figured that I have 6 shekels a day to eat. So I would walk the couple miles up to the shuk. I would buy a big piece of bread. I'd buy a few pieces of fish, a little bit of cheese, and then I would fold it over. I'd cut it in half. I would eat one day, and then I would eat the one the next day. I did that for a couple of weeks. Now this is after doing a 35-day fast before going there, so you know I'm eating like a king compared to what the fast was like. But it was at the end of this period of time that I had just enough money to get the taxi back to the airport. I've got the ticket. I've got a week to go. And so I put it in the envelope. I seal it up. This is the money to get back to the airport. I'll fast the last week. I've got the equivalent of about 60 cents left. And this 60 cents, I didn't know what to do. You couldn't buy a Coke with it. I went down to the wall early in the morning before daylight to pray. And as I came back from the wall, a widow woman was sitting there begging, and I said, you know, thank you, but I have nothing to give. I walked away, and I realized I had just a few shekels, about 60 cents, and I went back and gave it to her. And then I was completely free. I don't have to worry what to do with these 3 shekels anymore. So, you know, I'm just free as a bird now. Then I go back to the hostel, Petra Hostel, which I had checked out of quite a while before because a police officer had rented an apartment in Jerusalem, and he came to me one morning and said, will you stay in my apartment? I've got it all paid for. I've got to leave and go back to New York. Now, I didn't understand why he was so frantic at that point. I found out later that he was sitting on the toilet and a rat came up through the sewer system while he was sitting on the toilet, and it completely freaked him out. He went home. That's how I got an apartment free for a month. Now, I was thankful that I didn't find out about the rat incident until after I had gone back. But I decided to go back to this hostel to check to see if some of my friends from South Africa were there. And I got up there and I went to check to see if they got there. And the guy behind the counter, first thing in the morning, said, "I got a letter for you." I said, "What do you mean you got a letter for me?" He said, "You're Michael Rood, right?" I said, "Yes." "Yeah, you stayed here?" "Yeah." He gave me a letter. I opened it up. Here's a $50 bill in it. And it was postmarked about 2.5 weeks earlier. And I looked at it. It was a letter. A woman wrote and said, "I had a dream last night that I was to give you $50 in cash and I couldn't find you anywhere. And then I got a postcard from Jerusalem, from this hostel, that you were going to send a book to me." So that morning she put the $50 in the mail, sent it off. 2.5 weeks later, the morning I give away my last 3 shekels, I've got $50 to last for a week. I can live like a king. You know, I'm sharing this because this is his testimony. My life was redeemed from destruction. I got set free from numerous religious systems. I gleaned good things out of many of these experiences and these things that I did in life. And yet I realized that while we're still not seeing the signs, miracles, and wonders that we did in the book of Acts, is that we still need to get cleaned up. We're on a path. We haven't arrived at any place. I don't hold all the answers to the universe. I just know that I have been driven on a path, and that my life is a gift to the believers, and I have no choice. And hopefully you are able to glean from me. And there are a lot of people out there that can't glean anything from me. I open my mouth, they immediately hate me. I try to share something and they will tell lies. They will publish stuff out there that, you couldn't possibly spend the rest of your life putting out the fires and the lies that are out there, because, they're attacking me because I've upset their religious system. And there's nothing I can do about it. And so I'm not there for them. I'm there for those of you whose heart hungers for that same reality of truth, who want to walk by the Spirit, who want to hear the voice of Yahweh. And what he began leading me from the first time when I was haunted by the Sabbath as an 8-year-old, and then Fiddler on the Roof, and through the years, and to circumcise my firstborn, and to take me back to the Jewish roots, my Hebrew roots. Even though I was raised in the middle of farm country on an apple orchard in Michigan, far away from the culture, yet there was something there that kept on calling me back home. And when you hear that voice, you know it's calling you. When I was a young boy growing up in Michigan, every year we would cultivate the monarch butterflies. The butterfly would fly as an adult from a 5-acre plot in the Sierra Madres, come up to Michigan, mate, lay its eggs on the milkweed, and then the larva would then eat the milkweed, turn into a pupa, then emerge as an adult, mate again. Go through this cycle 2-3 times. The great-great-grandson of that monarch butterfly that flew from the Sierra Madres, now in the fall of the year, will mount up on wings, and with a brain the size of a pin, just a pinprick of a brain, that butterfly will fly back to that 5-acre plot in the Sierra Madres to spend the winter and to turn around and come back the next spring. The Almighty knows where he has sown his children throughout the world. Israel was scattered to the nations. Judah's been dispersed. But yet, we know what is home. And the pygmy headhunter from the tribe of Zulu who comes to the Messiah is just as much a member of the body of Messiah as the royal lineage of King David. And if the Spirit is calling you, you are his. If he chastens you, you're his. If you go through trials and afflictions, you are his. If the world hates you and reviles you, you are his. Be of comfort. Thank you.